He was branded a monster shoved toward the cold steel of the cages by a catchpole as a horrified, wealthy couple shrieked in fear. The entire room held its breath, certain the colossal German shepherd would lash out. But in the moment he tore loose, there was no attack. Instead, he bolted toward a solitary old man in the corner, desperately clinging to his leg with his paws, as if his very life depended on it. This was no ordinary stray. Concealed deep within his ear, a military code was tattooed G9, a mark someone had desperately tried to remove. He was a soldier stolen from his post, and in that moment he had just found his new commander. The story of what followed is a testament to how two fractured spirits can mend one another, and it will surely move you to tears. Before we continue, let me know where you're joining us from. Please drop your country in the comment section below. And if you share the conviction that no soldier, human or canine, should ever be abandoned, then press that subscribe button, because this story of Caleb and Ghost might just be the most profoundly moving thing you will hear all year. Denver's gray silhouette was vanishing behind a heavy curtain of white. The Rocky Mountains to the west, already lost to the storm. They were consumed by the encroaching blizzard. It was a cold that didn't merely graze the skin, it burrowed deep, searching for the very bone. A relentless, biting chill descended upon the city, like a suffocating shroud. Forecasters were calling it a freeze of historic proportions. Yet for the solitary figure on a ladder mending a loose gutter at the Denver Animal Shelter, it was nothing more than another Tuesday. Caleb Stone was a man who seemed sculpted from granite, then weathered by too many storms. Now in his late 50s, his buzz cut showed more salt than pepper, his face a roadmap etched with the deep lines of a hard-lived existence. Every movement was deliberate, efficient, and spare. He was clad in a faded field jacket from a bygone era and heavy oil-stained combat boots, the only things he seemed to trust. He offered his time here as a volunteer handyman, though he rarely spoke to the staff. He found more comfort in the company of broken things. They never asked any questions, and they never offered that look of pity. The wind intensified, screaming around the building's brick corners, lashing at Caleb's exposed hands. He did not flinch. He secured the final screw, tested the metal's hold, and descended the ladder. The cold was a welcome thing. The cold brought a certain clarity. It kept the memories locked in ice, frozen just beyond his reach. He forced the heavy service doors open into the shelter's lobby, stamping the remaining snow from his boots. The warmth inside was abrupt, thick with the sterile scent of bleach, damp fur, and the bitter aroma of stale coffee. Sarah, the director, was positioned behind the front desk. She was a perpetually frazzled woman in her 30s, her messy hair wrestled back by a clip. Her eyes shadowed with a familiar exhaustion as she spoke into the phone. One hand massaged her temple, while the other typed frantically across a keyboard. When her eyes met Caleb's, she offered a weary yet grateful nod. Caleb returned the silent acknowledgement, moving to the corner to pack away his tools. He was determined to leave before the storm unleashed its full fury, to escape to his cabin in the foothills, where the only sound was the wind moving through the pines. But the automatic glass doors hissed open, admitting a brutal gust of freezing air and a wave of raw, chaotic energy that stopped Caleb in his tracks. A couple entered. They were swathed in expensive parkas that appeared to have never encountered a single speck of dirt. The man was glancing at his watch, his impatience palpable, while the woman held a leash out at arm's length, her face a mask of carefully mingled disgust and fear. At the end of that leash was a creature both magnificent and utterly broken. He was a German shepherd, perhaps 10 months old, with a deep coat the color of dark sable and burnt toast. But his entire posture screamed defeat. His body was low to the ground, his tail tucked so profoundly between his legs that it pressed against his stomach. His ears were pinned back flat against his skull, and his wide amber eyes darted around the room, tracking every single movement, every shadow. He was panting in ragged bursts, a stress reaction that had nothing to do with being warm. "We are bringing him back," the man announced coldly, dropping a manila folder onto Sarah's desk. "Today, right now." Sarah sighed, ending her call. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, you adopted Monster only 3 days ago. The adjustment period almost always takes— He's defective, the woman interrupted, her voice shrill and sharp. Look at him. He refuses to let us near him. He paces all night long. He just stares at the front door. And this morning when I attempted to put his food down, he growled. The dog is aggressive. We wanted a guardian, not a wild animal. Caleb, standing quietly in the shadows of the corner, ceased packing his wrench. He fixed his gaze on the dog. He didn't see aggression. He saw a nervous system flooded and overwhelmed. He saw a creature that was braced for an impact that was sure to come. That growl isn't malice, ma'am, Sarah explained, her voice a strained whisper. It's pure terror. He just needs a little patience. Patience is a luxury we don't have, the husband retorted, his words like ice. This animal is a liability. Either you take him back or we'll dump him in the parking lot. A shadow fell over Sarah's face. She clicked her radio. Rick, get to the lobby now. Intake. A potential behavioral situation. Seconds later, Rick, a burly kennel tech, appeared. His hands clad in thick gloves, a catch pole in his grasp. A long metal rod with its ominous wire loop. The transformation in the dog was immediate and chilling. The instant the metallic sound of the catch pole cut through the air, the German shepherd went rigid, a statue of fear. His pupils swallowed the color in his eyes, leaving only black voids. He wasn't seeing a person trying to help. He was seeing a threat. He was reliving a memory, one that screamed of pain. Easy there, boy, Rick murmured, advancing slowly, the pole extended before him. No. Caleb breathed, his knuckles white around his toolbox handle. You can't corner him. But the warning was lost to the air. It was already too late. Rick made his move, thrusting the loop toward the dog's neck. The animal didn't attack. He detonated in a blast of pure, unbridled panic. With the impossible grace of a wild animal, the shepherd contorted mid-air, the leather leash tearing from the woman's shocked and careless grasp. A scream ripped from the woman's throat as she stumbled backward, her own boots betraying her. The husband bellowed in alarm, crashing back into a display of dog treats. He's out! He's going to attack us! The woman's shriek echoed his fear as Rick planted the pole, cutting off the escape route. The front glass doors were sealed shut. The dog was utterly trapped. He fought for traction on the slick linoleum floor, his claws making a frantic scratching sound as he desperately tried to find his footing. His breaths came in short, panicked gasps, high, thin yelps escaping him that sounded less like a dog and more like a terrified child. He whirled in circles, his eyes darting, searching for an escape, for any sanctuary. His wild eyes swept the room, pleading for a safe harbor. And then he froze. Across the lobby, a figure stood perfectly motionless. It was Caleb. Caleb hadn't flinched, hadn't uttered a sound, hadn't lifted a finger. He was a statue, his weight balanced, his presence absolute. His breathing was measured, his energy a solid grounding force. In a room vibrating with shrieking, chaotic energy, he was a point of stillness. Caleb was an anchor of silence. The dog's frantic gaze met his. For one heart-stopping moment, the world held its breath. The dog's eyes dropped to the heavy combat boots. He observed Caleb's steadfast posture. Then, with a heart-wrenching cry, the German shepherd hurled his body across the expansive lobby. "Look out! He's heading right for you!" Rick cried out, surging forward. But Caleb remained perfectly still. He made no move to brace himself. He just relaxed his stance, bending his knees slightly. The dog wasn't aiming for his throat. It wasn't lunging for his hands. The animal slid into Caleb with the force of a baseball player stealing home base, crashing hard against the man's shins. The impact nearly sent the older man toppling, and then an act so unexpected it hushed every soul in the room. The dog pushed up onto his hind legs, embracing Caleb's thigh with his front paws. He pressed his face deep into the coarse, worn material of Caleb's field jacket. He pushed his entire body against Caleb's leg with such force it was as if he were trying to become one with him. A violent tremor racked his body, a shudder Caleb felt resonate all the way up his spine. This wasn't an attack. It was a desperate cling. He held on for dear life as though Caleb were the last solid thing in a world melting away into water. "Get back." "Sir, I've got him," Rick yelled, lifting the catchpole once more. The dog detected the motion, releasing a low, guttural growl that rumbled against Caleb's leg, but his grip never faltered. He only held on tighter, his sharp claws piercing the heavy canvas of the pants and scraping against Caleb's skin. "Back off," Caleb commanded. His voice was not loud, yet it sliced through the tension like a blade. It was a voice forged by years of yelling over the thunder of rotor blades and the crack of gunfire, a voice that tolerated no dissent. Rick froze in place. "Sir, that animal is a threat." "He's not a threat," Caleb murmured, glancing down. The dog was now gazing up at him, its amber eyes swimming with a terror so deep it sent a pang through Caleb's own heart. It was the very same look Caleb had seen staring back from the mirror 1,000 times after being ripped from sleep by his nightmares. The look of a soul lost deep behind enemy lines, desperate for a way back home. "He's no monster," Caleb whispered, completely ignoring the shocked stillness of the Harringtons and the staff. "He's just a soldier, searching for his unit." Slowly, carefully, Caleb began to lower himself. He didn't lean over the dog. He knew that would be seen as a threat. He descended straight down until he was kneeling in the icy puddle of melted snow on the floor. The dog flinched at the movement, but refused to pull away. A damp nose pressed into the hollow of Caleb's neck, a soft, broken whimper escaping its throat. A wave of pure terror washed over Caleb, an acrid scent mingling with the storm's ozone and the smell of drenched fur. Slowly, deliberately, Caleb lifted his hand, his palm open and unthreatening. He made no move to stroke the trembling creature. Instead, he settled his large, calloused hand firmly upon the dog's shoulder, a grounding weight, a silent promise of safety. "Stand down, Marine." Caleb's voice was a low whisper, a gravelly sound thick with emotions long suppressed. "Stand down. You're secure. The perimeter is clear." The effect was nothing short of a miracle. It was more than the shaking that ceased. It was as if every taut string holding the animal's rigid frame had been severed at once. In an instant, the tension poured out of the animal's muscles. A deep, shuddering sigh escaped him, the sound of a battle finally over, of utter exhaustion. His great head grew heavy, dropping onto Caleb's shoulder as his eyelids fluttered shut. He sagged against the old soldier's frame, a complete surrender of his weight, his terror, and his trust to this stranger in worn combat boots. And for the first time in an age, Caleb felt a warmth spread through him, something other than the familiar, biting cold. He felt a steady heartbeat against his own chest, a rhythm that echoed his own. Outside, the blizzard raged, intent on burying the city in a shroud of white. But inside that lobby, at the heart of a circle of stunned onlookers, a silent covenant had been forged. Later, the old Ford pickup rattled and groaned over the frozen washboard ruts of the mountain road, its headlights carving desperate tunnels through the blinding, swirling snow. Next to Caleb Stone, on the cracked leather of the passenger seat, the dog sat sentinel. Not a single muscle had twitched since they'd pulled out of the shelter's lot. He remained perfectly upright, vigilant, his amber eyes sweeping the dark tree line with the focused intensity of a radar operator on high alert. This was no family pet on its way to a new home. This was a soldier being deployed to a forward operating base. "Monster," Caleb breathed the name, letting it settle on his tongue. It tasted of failure and ash. "That's a garbage name," he said to the silence. "A name designed to make people fear you." The dog's ear twitched, the only sign he was listening, his gaze never leaving the perimeter. "You're big, and you're strong, and you held the line back there." Caleb's voice was firm. As he shifted gears, the truck groaning as it climbed deeper into the Rockies. "Titan. We'll call you Titan." For the first time, the dog turned his magnificent head, his eyes meeting Caleb's for one fleeting, significant moment before he resumed his watch. It was an acknowledgement, a quiet acceptance. The name stood. Farther up the mountain, Caleb's cabin awaited a structure born not of comfort but of necessity. It stood sentinel upon a ridge, gazing out over a valley cloaked in black pines, countless miles from the last trace of a paved road. Crafted from rough-hewn logs and corrugated steel, it was a fortress of solitude, where Caleb had weathered the last 5 years, desperately trying to silence the world's echoes. He cut the engine. The ensuing silence was crushing, a profound quiet made even deeper by the blanketing snow. Caleb swung his door open and stepped into the cold, bracing for the dog to either tear into the fresh powder or stake his claim. But Titan remained perfectly still. He simply waited. He held his position until Caleb rounded the truck to the passenger side and unlatched the door. Only then did he descend to the ground in one seamless movement, instantly pressing his body against Caleb's left leg. There was no strain on the makeshift rope leash Caleb had tied. No pull, no resistance. He moved in flawless sync with the man mirroring Caleb's every step, halting the very instant Caleb did. Heel Caleb breathed his words, turning to mist in the frozen air. Someone trained you for a perfect heel. As they approached the cabin door, Caleb reached for the handle. In a sudden, deliberate shift, Titan moved, but not to rush inside. He positioned himself directly in front of Caleb, using his shoulder to apply a gentle pressure that urged the man back. Caleb froze, his curiosity piqued. He carefully unlatched the door and swung it inward. Titan didn't charge in. Instead, he dropped his head, entering low and with incredible speed. He immediately cleared the left corner, then the right. He swept through the small living space, tasting the air, his ears pivoting like radar dishes seeking a signal. He cleared the kitchenette, then the single bedroom tucked in the back. Only after he had systematically swept the entire 800-square-foot cabin did he return to the entrance, where he sat and fixed his gaze on Caleb. Clear. The message was delivered with absolute certainty. A deep chill traced its way down Caleb's spine, one that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. This was no ordinary well-behaved dog. This was an animal conditioned for close-quarters battle. CQB. You've done this before, Caleb murmured, sliding the deadbolt home. Who did you belong to? Titan SWAT DEA Special Ops. Titan gave no answers, offering only a deep, weary sigh as he finally settled to the floor. But he didn't choose the warm rug by the fire. He took up a strategic position on the cold hardwood, placing his back securely against the wall, his nose aimed squarely at the front door. The fatal funnel. He was establishing a watch, a sentry post. Caleb slowly made his way to the kitchenette. His own stomach knotted and growled, a stark reminder that he hadn't eaten since morning. He reached for a can of high-quality beef stew, a portion of his own emergency rations, and poured it into a chipped ceramic bowl. He set it down on the floor close to the warmth of the fire. Eat up, Titan. You look like you're running on empty. Titan rose to his feet. His nose twitched as the scent of meat filled the air, and a thick rope of saliva hung from his jowls. He was starving, yet he made no move toward the bowl. His gaze shifted from the food to Caleb, and then he sat back down. Caleb's brow furrowed. Go on, it's for you. But Titan remained frozen. He whined softly, a sound of agonizing frustration, but his deeply ingrained discipline held him in place. Caleb watched him for a long, heavy moment, the gears in his memory grinding. He was thrown back to the strict hierarchy of the K-9 units he'd served alongside in Fallujah. The handler eats first. The handler is the provider, the alpha. If the alpha doesn't eat, it's a signal that the pack is in danger. Caleb let out a sigh. He tore open a pack of beef jerky for himself. He leaned against the counter and took a deliberate, slow bite, chewing with purpose. He swallowed. Okay, Caleb said, giving a firm nod towards the dog. Release. Titan lunged forward. The food vanished in seconds. This wasn't gluttony, it was fuel intake, efficient, desperate. After the meals, Caleb truly saw the animal under the harsh glare of the kitchen bulb. Now that the adrenaline of the rescue had finally faded, the dog's condition was heartbreakingly apparent. His thick, matted coat had been hiding a terrible truth. When Caleb ran a hand down Titan's back, he felt every single vertebra. The dog was skeletal. "Let's get you cleaned up," Caleb murmured. "You smell of the kennel and of fear." He moved to fill the large utility tub in the mudroom with warm water. Titan was wary of the tub, his claws clicking anxiously across the linoleum, but some deeper instinct told him to trust Caleb. He permitted himself to be lifted into the water. As the warmth soaked through his dark fur, the clear water turned a murky, sorrowful gray. Caleb lathered a bar of unscented soap. He worked his hands gently over the dog's bony flanks, feeling the jagged ridges of old scars hidden deep beneath the fur. Some felt like bite marks. Others traced the sharp lines of wire fences. But as Caleb's hands reached for Titan's neck, intending to scrub the collar area, the reaction was terrifyingly violent. Titan whipped his head around his jaws, snapping shut just inches from Caleb's flesh. It wasn't a bite. It was a desperate warning. The dog pulled back, pulled. He was trembling, his eyes wild with terror. He shrank into the tub's corner, instinctively shielding his vulnerable neck. Caleb went still, pulling his hands back ever so slowly. "Easy now, buddy. Easy. I'm not the one who did this to you." And then he finally saw it. The fur around his neck was sparse and broken. Beneath it, a profound groove was pressed deep into his skin, a thick ring of calloused scar tissue, evidence of a collar pulled cruelly tight, most likely a prong collar applied with brutal force. Someone had tried to shatter this dog's spirit, to choke the very life from him. "We'll just skip the neck for now," Caleb whispered softly. "We'll just take it slow." A full hour passed before the bath was done, and the dog was gently toweled dry. By then, the storm outside had unleashed its full fury, rattling the cabin's metal roof. Inside, the fire was beginning to fade to embers. Caleb settled into his worn leather armchair with a towel across his lap. Titan, now clean and dry, seemed like a completely different creature. His coat shone with deep notes of mahogany and black. He moved toward Caleb with caution. "Come on over," Caleb murmured gently, reaching for a grooming brush. After a moment's hesitation, Titan stepped closer, resting the heavy weight of his head upon Caleb's knee. Caleb started to brush him with long, rhythmic strokes. The steady motion was a balm for them both. Caleb could feel his own pulse begin to slow. For the first time in years, the cabin's profound silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. While brushing the soft fur around Titan's right ear, Caleb's thumb grazed something unnatural, an uneven texture on the inner flap. It felt like a small cluster of raised bumps. Titan flinched from the touch but didn't retreat. He was too exhausted, too soothed by the fire's warmth. Caleb paused his brushing. He gently folded the ear back to get a better look. The skin inside was healthy and pink, except for one strange dark patch. He squinted, trying to make it out. It was a chaotic smear of black ink, a crude blotch that had no business being there. "What in the world is that?" Caleb whispered to himself, reaching for the tactical flashlight on the end table. With a click, he switched it on, focusing the intense beam onto the inside of Titan's ear. The light sliced through the dimness, and Caleb's breath caught sharp in his throat. In the harsh glare of the LED, the ink smudge gave up its dark secret. It was a tattoo, but not the kind a breeder would ever give a young dog. It was a crude, jagged layer of black, brutally jabbed into the skin with a needle gun to obscure whatever marks lay beneath. A desperate attempt had been made to obliterate it, a crude scribble meant to erase the past. But the original ink was professional piercing, deep and indelibly dark. The scar tissue from the brutal cover-up had puckered the skin, creating a raised, braille-like map of the truth. Caleb stretched the flesh gently between his thumbs, angling the beam of light. He traced the faint lines still discernible beneath the chaotic scrawl of ink. A letter began to emerge, a GA dash, then a number 9. With a sharp click, Caleb killed the light and leaned back, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The room was suddenly ice cold. "G9," he whispered into the suffocating darkness. He knew precisely what it meant. He'd seen it on bases from Kandahar to Okinawa. Every single piece of military hardware is assigned a serial number. Every rifle, every tank, and every military working dog an MWD. This animal was no stray. He was not some failed house pet. Titan was United States government property. He was a Tier 1 asset, a living, breathing weapon of war who had been stolen, his identity savagely stripped away and left to starve. And then he was sold to civilians who had no idea they were bringing a loaded gun into their living room. Caleb's gaze fell upon the dog. Titan was sound asleep now, his paws twitching as he chased ghosts through his dreams. He looked utterly peaceful, but Caleb knew better. He knew that beneath that fur lay a soldier who had been declared missing in action, or something infinitely worse. "Then they tried to erase you," Caleb murmured, his hand resting protectively over the mutilated ear. "But they didn't finish the job." Caleb stared out the window into the white void of the blizzard. He was no longer just a handyman with a rescue dog. He was a Marine who had just found a brother left behind enemy lines. And Caleb Stone never left a man behind. The morning sun that struck the peaks of the Rockies was a cruel deception. It was brilliant, blindingly so, but it held no warmth. Inside the cabin, Caleb hunched over a laptop that looked as battle-scarred as he was. It was a thick, black brick of a machine, obsolete but durable, humming loudly on the rough pine table. Titan lay loyally at his feet. The dog hadn't strayed from a 2-foot radius of Caleb since the bath the night before. He slept with one eye open, his chin resting heavily on his paws, watching Caleb type with 2 stiff, determined fingers. Caleb didn't trust the internet, but he trusted the network. The old core network. It wasn't a website. It was an invisible web of contacts, secure forums, and private message boards where veterans traded truth. Equipment and the kind of warnings the civilian world blissfully ignored. He accessed a forum that had been a ghost in his own life for months. The interface was a relic raw text on a bleak gray canvas. He navigated to a quiet corner of the site, the working dog K9 handler subsection. His fingers typed out a prayer into the search bar, stolen MWD Virginia tattoo G9. He hit enter, then took a long sip of black coffee, letting the bitter heat anchor him to the moment. On the agonizingly slow satellite link, the results began to crawl onto the screen. When they did, a cold knot formed in Caleb's gut. There were only a few hits, but each one screamed with a silent, frantic urgency. They were bolos. "Be on the lookout." Digital flyers, nearly a year old, covered in digital dust. He clicked the first thread, his heart pounding. The title was a siren. Alert. High-value target theft. Project Guardian facility. Virginia 1214s. Caleb drew closer, his eyes straining against the dim glow of the screen. The post was chillingly detailed. It painted a picture of a precise surgical break-in at a private training center deep in rural Virginia. This place, Project Guardian, was no ordinary military kennel. It was a sanctuary, a specialized program funded by veteran advocacy groups. Their sacred mission to train elite service dogs for special operations, veterans battling the deepest scars of war, severe treatment-resistant PTSD, and traumatic brain injuries. These are not just pets. The author had written the words burning with intensity. These are living medical instruments, Tier 1 assets. The invaders knew exactly what they were after. They had ignored the younger pups moving with cold purpose straight for the Alpha-class dogs just 6 weeks from their final life-saving certification. 3 dogs were stolen. 2 were found during a drug raid in Baltimore a month later, skeletal and traumatized but alive. 1 remained lost to the world. Name Ghost, breed German Shepherd, Sable, IDG-9, distinguishing marks, an impossibly high prey drive, highly food-motivated. Trained in DPT, deep pressure therapy, and nightmare interruption, Caleb's gaze fell upon Titan. The dog simply looked back, his head tilted in quiet question. Ghost. Caleb whispered the name, a painful revelation. It fit perfectly. He was a ghost, a phantom soldier stripped of his purpose and sold into bondage. The forum theorized the thieves had tried to sell him as a vicious guard dog to drug lords or paranoid elites, never comprehending that a true service dog's power is in its control, not its chaos. When Ghost refused to become a monster, he had likely been met with fists and starvation, only to be cast aside or sold for a pittance to that couple in Denver. Caleb's thumb swiped down to the very end of the post. A name and a direct line appeared. Contact Elena Vance, head trainer. The digits seemed to burn into Caleb's screen. He knew he had to call right then and there, but an abrupt, heavy shift in the atmosphere forced his gaze upward. Beyond the glass, the brilliant morning sun had been utterly swallowed. These mountains were infamous for their mercurial weather, able to turn on a dime. Ominous, bruised purple clouds were boiling over the ridge, surging forward with an unnatural velocity. The wind fell silent, replaced by a dense, static stillness that made every hair on Caleb's arms prickle. A storm was brewing, a truly vicious one. By nightfall, the entire cabin was trembling. This was no mere snowstorm. It was a violent winter thunderstorm, a terrifyingly rare collision of frigid fronts. A piercing shriek tore through the gaps between the logs, a sound like the roar of incoming jet engines. Then the first concussion of thunder struck. It didn't roll, it detonated, an earth-shattering crack that vibrated up through the floorboards. Caleb's coffee mug slipped from his grasp, exploding on impact, scattering ceramic shrapnel across the floor. In an instant, he wasn't in Colorado anymore. The sharp scent of ozone from the storm warped inside his mind, twisting into the acrid stench of cordite and scorched rubber. That blinding flash through the window wasn't merely lightning. It was the searing bloom of a mortar tube. Fallujah 2004, the alleyway, the ambush. Incoming Caleb screamed into the empty room. He scrambled desperately backward, his boots slipping on the slick hardwood. His back slammed against the wall in the corner, and he crumpled to the floor, yanking his knees tightly to his chest. He clamped his hands over his ears, his eyes squeezed shut against the horror. His heart hammered like a jackhammer against his ribs. Thump, 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 a frantic rhythm so fast it was painful. His lungs locked up. He couldn't draw a breath. The air grew impossibly thin, choked with dust and thick smoke. He was drowning right here on dry land. Another deafening clap of thunder rattled the house to its foundation. A strangled sob escaped Caleb's throat as he buried his face deeper into his knees. The break was complete. He was trapped inside the memory, bracing for the shrapnel that would tear him to pieces. He was utterly alone. He was going to die in this forgotten hole. And then a sudden weight pressed down on him. It was heavy, solid, and undeniably warm. Caleb flinched, shoving at it, his mind screaming it was falling debris. But this weight held firm. It pressed more insistently against his chest. Something wet and rough gently scraped across his cheek. Once and then again. No. A ragged gasp tore from Caleb's throat as he fought for breath. A deep, calming whine resonated against his very bones. Caleb's eyes flew open. The room was a dizzying vortex, swimming in deep shadows, but just inches from his face were two steady, amber eyes. Titan. The dog had wedged his large body into the suffocating corner with him. He'd placed his front paws on Caleb's shoulders and settled his heavy chest directly upon Caleb's own heaving one. It was a precise, intentional distribution of weight. This was deep pressure therapy. Titan wasn't afraid of the storm. He was performing his duty. He was grounding Caleb to the floor, using his own body as an anchor to force Caleb's spiraling nervous system to slow down. Titan licked Caleb's face again, his tongue deliberately rough. He pushed Caleb's chin up with his wet nose, compelling him to meet his gaze. I am here. You are here. We are safe. Titan, Caleb wheezed. The dog let out a long, heavy exhale, blanketing Caleb's neck in warmth. He held perfectly still. He maintained his position, a living bulwark against the invisible terrors waging war in Caleb's mind. Slowly, almost painfully, the crushing grip on Caleb's lungs began to loosen. The phantom smell of gunpowder vanished, replaced by the scent of dog fur and pine wood. The cacophony of mortar fire resolved back into the sound of thunder, now distant and muffled. Caleb's hands, which had been desperately clutching his head, slowly lowered. They found the thick, coarse fur of Titan's neck. He buried his fingers deep, holding on as if he were a drowning man clinging to a lifeline. "Good boy," Caleb whispered, his voice cracking. "You're a good boy." They stayed that way for 20 minutes. The storm raged on outside, but in that corner of the cabin, the siege of panic had finally been broken. When Caleb finally summoned the strength to stand, his legs were unsteady, but his mind was shockingly, perfectly clear. He looked at Titan, who was now sitting up, watching him with profound expectation. "You're not just a dog," Caleb said, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. "You're a medic." Caleb made his way to the table, his hand still trembling, but now they moved with intention. He pulled a slip of paper from his pocket where he'd frantically scribbled the number from the forum. It was 900 p.m. in Virginia. It was already midnight. He didn't care. He picked up his phone and dialed. The ringback tone hummed 3 times, then a click. "Hello?" The voice was female, clouded with sleep, but it was forged with an edge of pure steel. Elena Vance's voice was frayed, like someone who hadn't known a peaceful night's sleep in a year. A hint of a southern accent lingered, but it was sharp all business. "My name is Caleb Stone." He stated, his voice a low rasp. "I'm a former staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. I am calling you from Colorado." A heavy silence hung in the air. "Mr. Stone? It's the middle of the night. How in the world did you get this number? I'm looking at a bolo alert on the Leatherneck forums," Caleb explained, for a missing asset. "Identification number G9. The silence on her end of the line was absolute. Then, a sharp, sudden gasp. "You have information on G9. All traces of exhaustion vanished from her voice, replaced by a razor-sharp edge and a raw desperation. "I have more than just information," Caleb said, his gaze falling upon Titan, who had trailed him to the table, now pressing his head firmly against Caleb's leg. "I have him. You found him." Elena's voice fractured with disbelief. "Is he alive? Is he safe?" "He's alive," Caleb confirmed softly. "But he's been through hell. Starved, abused. Someone even tried to tattoo over his identification. Oh dear God." Elena breathed a horrified whisper. Is he aggressive?" The report warned he might have turned. "No," Caleb stated with unshakable certainty. "He's not aggressive. He's working. What do you mean? We just had a thunderstorm tear through here." "A brutal one." It triggered an episode for me. Admitting weakness was like swallowing glass for Caleb, but he knew this was the only proof that mattered. I went to ground. A full-blown panic attack, the flashbacks. "Okay," Elena said gently, her voice a lifeline. "And the dog," Caleb went on. "He moved me into a corner, climbed right onto my chest, applying deep pressure. He licked my face until I was present again. He didn't let up until he felt my heart rate slow. From the other end of the line came a sound that shattered Caleb's own composure. It was a sob, strangled and fought against, but it was undeniable. That's the anchor command." Elena wept, her professional facade crumbling completely. "I taught him that myself. It took us 6 months to perfect. He's pressing his weight on the vagus nerve to slow the heart. He saved my life tonight," Caleb said, his hand resting gently on Titan's head. "That's Ghost," Elena managed to say, her voice trembling with an impossible mix of relief and profound sorrow. "You found Ghost." The flight from Virginia to Denver felt endless, and the drive deep into the mountains would consume another 3 hours. Elena Vance had sent Caleb her flight itinerary with a brief, determined message. "I'm coming to bring him home." Home. The word lingered in the cabin's still air like a ghost. Caleb Stone just stared down at his phone. The screen went black, and a familiar hollow ache settled deep in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known since his discharge papers were signed. For the past 48 hours, this cabin had been their fortress, a sanctuary for 2 wounded soldiers. Now it was nothing more than a transit station, a fleeting stopover. Caleb watched Titan's shadow. The dog was pacing near the door, a restless spirit. The storm had broken, leaving a world scrubbed clean and buried beneath 2 feet of silent powder. The air in the cabin felt too thick, too heavy with the imminent arrival of the woman who would tear away the only living creature Caleb had connected with in years. "You feel it too, don't you, boy?" Caleb murmured, pulling on his heavy parka. "It's too damn quiet in here." Titan paused his pacing to look at Caleb, his tail offering a single, slow wag. He recognized the boots. He saw the jacket. He knew the ritual. "Let's go," Caleb said, his voice low as he grabbed his gloves. "One last patrol." They stepped out into a blindingly white expanse. The sun was high, glaring off the snow, with a brilliance that forced Caleb's eyes into a painful squint. The air was crisp, thin, and it bit at the inside of his nose. It was a perfect, crushing silence, the kind you find only in the deep Rockies in the heart of winter. They moved away from the cabin, ascending the ridge toward the dense tree line of ponderosa pines. The snow was deep, reaching Caleb's knees, but Titan carved through it with powerful, lunging bounds. He wasn't playing, though. There was no rolling in the snow or snapping at flakes. He moved with an unwavering purpose, cutting their path, tasting the wind. Caleb followed, placing his boots in the dog's wake. He watched the animal's fluid motion, marveling at the sheer engineering of him, the slope of his back, the power coiled in his haunches, the constantly rotating radar of his ears. Elena had called him a Tier 1 asset, a living medical device. But out here, set against the savage beauty of the wilderness, he looked primal. He looked like he belonged to the mountain itself. They hiked for 1 hour, the rhythmic crunch of snow the only sound to break the stillness. Caleb let his mind drift, but it kept returning to the handover tomorrow. He kept telling himself it was the right thing to do. The dog belonged to the program. He was meant for some young kid back from overseas, missing legs, or a piece of their mind. Someone who needed him far more than a broken-down hermit hiding from the world. "He's not yours to keep, Stone." No, he never was. As Caleb saw the dog paws drawn by a faint deer trail, his own heart whispered a counter-truth. He chose me. Their journey led them to a rugged outcropping roughly 2 miles from the sanctuary of the cabin. It was a stark, narrow shelf of granite, a precipice overlooking the vast, silent valley. On one side, a sheer, dizzying drop plummeted into nothingness. On the other, a tangled maze of scrub oak and ancient boulders stood guard. It was a place of breathtaking beauty and chilling peril. Caleb halted his breath, catching in his chest as he leaned heavily against a massive stone. He eased the zipper on his jacket, letting the cool air bite. "Take 5, Marine," he murmured, but Titan showed no sign of relaxing. Usually when they stopped, Titan would settle by Caleb's left leg. Not this time. The dog was frozen, locked in place, mid-stride, utterly motionless. His entire body was tense, as unyielding as iron. His head dipped low, neck stretched forward, nostrils flaring as he tasted a scent on the wind. "What is it, boy?" Caleb's question was barely a whisper, an instinctual drop in volume. But Titan's gaze never turned back to him. His entire being was fixated on the ridgeline looming above some 50 yards up the incline, where the rocks jutted out in a menacing, jagged overhang, and then a primal signal. The fur along Titan's spine erupted. This was no subtle shift. It was a sudden, sharp ridge of hackles from neck to tail. Silence, there was no bark. A common house pet would have yapped, attempting to frighten away the unseen threat with noise. But Titan was a professional. A bark betrays your position. A bark masks the sound of an approaching enemy. Instead, a rumble began deep within Titan's chest, a vibration so profound it traveled through the ground and up into the very soles of Caleb's boots. It was more than a growl. It was a subterranean tremor, a sound like tectonic plates groaning against each other. It was a definitive warning. Target acquired. Caleb's combat senses, long buried by time, roared back to life, seizing control. The air froze in his lungs. His eyes swept the ridgeline, methodically dissecting every shadow. And then movement. So slight he first dismissed it as a trick of the shifting light. A shadow dancing against the stone. But this shadow had substance. It peeled itself away from the rock, revealing a form of tawny, rippling muscle. Hugging the ground, a mountain lion materialized. It was enormous, a male, easily 150 pounds of pure, coiled instinct and lethal power. The beast was crouched on the ledge directly above them, its long tail twitching in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, the only betrayal of its deadly intent. Its golden predatory eyes were fixed not on the dog, but directly on Caleb. To the predator, Caleb was the slow, soft target. The dog was the threat. But in this moment, the man was the meal. "Easy now." Caleb breathed his hand, inching deliberately toward the knife at his belt, a pitiful defense against such a perfect engine of death. He was without his rifle. He had been careless, complacent. The cougar adjusted its powerful haunches, gathering its muscles for the strike. It was measuring the distance. It was about to spring. "Titan, heel!" Caleb hissed, trying to pull his companion back to orchestrate a slow retreat. But Titan ignored the command. For the very first time since Caleb had known him, the dog disobeyed. Titan broke his stay. He didn't run. He moved forward. In a startling blur of dark fur, Titan placed himself squarely in the line of attack, a living shield between Caleb and the predator. He widened his stance, anchoring his back legs into the earth. He bared his teeth not in a common snarl, but in a silent, horrifying display of white weaponry. The mountain lion hissed low, its ears flattening against its skull. It hadn't anticipated a barrier. It anticipated fleeing prey. And prey that runs triggers the primal instinct to chase. Prey that holds its ground creates confusion. But prey that challenges, that changes the entire equation. A roar tore from Titan's chest. It wasn't a bark. It was a declaration of war. He lunged forward a few feet, snapping his jaws at the air, daring the cat to make its move. "You want him, you'll have to come through me." The mountain lion flinched. It glanced from the defiant German shepherd, then back to Caleb, who had drawn his blade and was standing tall, adding his own height to the sudden wall of defiance. Predators are nature's economists. They calculate risk versus reward with chilling precision. A meal is a necessity, but an injury in the dead of winter is a death sentence. This was no longer an easy kill. This had become a fight. The great cat huffed a sound of deep annoyance. It slowly rose from its coiled position, its lethal gaze never leaving Titan. With a fluid, almost dismissive turn, it dissolved back into the shadows of the rocks, vanishing as if it had never been there at all. Caleb held his breath for 10 agonizing seconds. 20. "Clear," he whispered, his voice shaking. Titan held his ground for another full minute, his intense gaze tracking the invisible trail of the departed cat. Only when he was absolutely certain the threat was gone did the hackles on his back finally lower. He turned to Caleb. The ferocious warrior disappeared, replaced instantly by the gentle, concerned medic he knew so well. He trotted over, nudging Caleb's trembling hand with his wet nose, checking for any sign of harm. Overcome, Caleb dropped to his knees in the snow. The wave of adrenaline crashed over him, leaving him trembling. His hands shook so violently the knife slipped from his grasp. He lunged for Titan, grabbing the scruff of his neck, and buried his face into the dense, warm fur. "You fool!" Caleb sobbed, his voice cracking with emotion. "You stupid, magnificent fool. It would have torn you to pieces." Titan whined softly, gently, licking the salty tears from Caleb's cheek. He didn't understand the threat of the cat. All he knew was that his human was seeping distress, and that had to be fixed. Caleb tightened his arms around the dog's neck, pulling him into a desperate, grounding hug. The dog's body was a warm, solid, living anchor. In that one moment, kneeling in the biting snow, the truth hit Caleb with more force than any blizzard ever could. This wasn't just fear for his dog's life. It wasn't merely gratitude for being saved. It was love. He was in love with this creature with a fierce, terrifying power he hadn't allowed himself to feel for anyone since long before the war. He'd constructed a fortress of ice around his heart to keep out the pain, to barricade himself from loss. But this dog, this broken, abandoned, ever-loyal soldier, had simply walked through those walls and made a home in the very center of his soul. "I can't lose you," Caleb whispered into his fur. "I just can't." But the sun was already bleeding toward the horizon. The shadows stretched long and cold. Somewhere Elena Vance was on a flight. Time was running out. Caleb pulled away, staring into Titan's deep amber eyes. The dog gazed back his trust absolute. He had performed his duty. He had guarded his marine. He was blissfully unaware that the true danger to their world wasn't a predator on a mountain, but a woman in a rental car heading north on Interstate 7. "Let's go home, Ghost," Caleb said, the dog's true name feeling like a prayer on his lips for the first time. It felt like a final admission. They descended the mountain in a profound silence. The connection between them felt stretched taut, almost to the point of snapping. Every step closer to the cabin was a step toward their undoing, and Caleb Stone, a man who had stared down war, starvation, and crushing solitude, felt a terrifying certainty that he would not survive this goodbye. The sun had vanished completely behind the Rockies, staining the sky a deep, bruised violet that bled into the abyss of night. Within the cabin, the only illumination came from the glowing embers in the hearth and one solitary lamp on the kitchen table. The quiet was different now. It wasn't the comfortable silence of two warriors at rest. It was a dense, crushing quiet, heavy with unspoken words and imminent heartbreak, a stillness that hangs heavy in the air, the kind that precedes a final, heart-wrenching farewell. With robotic efficiency, Caleb Stone navigated the confines of his small living room. He was preparing to sever a bond. He located a solid cardboard box, setting it near the doorway like a final, unbreachable barrier. Inside, he carefully placed the heavy ceramic bowl, the very one from which Titan had eaten every meal. Beside it, he laid the half-empty bag of high-protein kibble, a recent purchase from town. At last, his hand closed around a frayed, knotted rope, a simple toy they had discovered together in the back of his old truck. It was the only plaything Titan had ever claimed as his own. Caleb clutched it, his thumb tracing the coarse, familiar fibers as he stared blankly at the wall, lost in a memory. His jaw clenched, a muscle pulsing in his cheek, betraying the turmoil within. He was a Marine. Discipline was his creed. He understood orders. He always completed the mission. And this mission was brutally simple. Secure the asset, then relinquish the asset. "Don't get soft, Stone," he whispered fiercely to himself, a command against his own heart. He let the rope fall into the box with a soft thud. By the door, Titan lay with his head on his paws, his posture one of rest, but his soul was wide awake. Luminous amber eyes followed Caleb's every step, a silent, knowing gaze. He could feel it. The sanctuary of their cabin had been invaded by a chilling current of anxiety. Each time Caleb passed, Titan would raise his magnificent head, a low, sorrowful sound escaping his throat, a questioning whine that pierced the silence. "It's fine," Caleb rasped, his voice harsh. He refused to meet the dog's gaze. He simply couldn't bear it. "You're going back to the professionals. Real meals, a real purpose." But the words felt hollow, and Titan remained unconvinced. He rose to his feet, pacing in a tight, anxious circle, before settling back into his position, a living barricade at the threshold. And then a sound broke the stillness. Distant at first, the distinct crunch of tires compressing the snow. The sound swelled the low hum of an engine laboring up the steep, icy driveway. Suddenly, beams of light sliced through the front window, illuminating the swirling dust motes in the air like frantic spirits. Titan's entire body went rigid. A deep, menacing growl rumbled from the depths of his chest. This was no silent warning, not like the one he'd given for the mountain lion. This was an unmistakable territorial challenge. Intruder. Caleb moved to the window, peering out. A sterile white rental SUV now sat beside his own weathered, rust-covered truck. The engine died, plunging the world outside back into silence. A door creaked open, and a woman emerged, bracing herself against the biting Arctic wind. Elena Vance was not the person Caleb had pictured. She was slight of build, maybe in her mid-30s, her dark hair pulled back into a stern, no-nonsense ponytail. She was bundled in a heavy tactical jacket, an insignia on the sleeve that remained an unreadable mystery from where he stood. And cargo pants were neatly tucked into a pair of rugged hiking boots. She gave off no impression of being a sentimental animal lover. Instead, she resembled field personnel, her movements sharp with a coiled, anxious energy. Each exhale was a plume of white vapor in the frigid air as her gaze fixed on the cabin. The moment Caleb opened the front door, Titan lunged forward, a wall of muscle planting himself defensively in front of Caleb, the fur along his spine bristling. His teeth were bared in a ferocious snarl, a warning that would have sent any ordinary person scrambling back to their vehicle in terror. He was a guardian protecting his handler, a living barrier holding the line. "Titan, stand down," Caleb commanded. But the words felt hollow, his own heart not truly behind them. Elena stopped dead at the base of the porch steps, her eyes locked onto the massive German shepherd, obstructing the doorway, a menacing glint off his exposed teeth. He looked ready to kill. Where most would have recoiled in fear, Elena remained motionless. Her eyes widened instantly, filling with a sudden sheen of tears, yet her feet were rooted to the spot. As she slowly reached into her jacket pocket, Titan's growl deepened ominously, interpreting the movement as a clear threat. He coiled his powerful hind legs, preparing to launch. "Easy," Caleb warned, his hand moving cautiously toward Titan's collar. "He's protective." But Elena offered no reply. Her hand emerged with a small silver object. It was no weapon. It was a specialized training whistle, a high-frequency model designed for commands over long distances. With trembling hands, she raised it to her lips and blew. For Caleb, the world remained silent. For Titan, it was like a clap of thunder. The change was immediate, a switch being flipped. The snarl melted from Titan's face. His jaws snapped closed. His ears, which had been flattened in aggression, instantly